For the first time in 30 years, the Liberation Army launched a lightning-fast offensive across the South. Our forces are closing in on the last lines of defense held by the Saigon government. People all over the country are counting down to the day of reunification. Just when it seemed the suffering and losses had finally ended, right at the Sunoxi Steel Gate, the enemy launched a surprise, large-scale counterattack, fighting as if they had nothing left to lose. Despite the difficulties, our army still achieved victory. The gates to Saigon were thrown wide open, and the last defensive efforts of the pro-American regime were completely thwarted. So how did that battle unfold? The story begins in late 1973. Seemed to be going very well. For once, following the signing of the Paris Peace Accords, the United States ceased direct intervention in Vietnam and gradually reduced aid to the Saigon government. However, a new threat is beginning to emerge. The Republic of Vietnam continuously organized land grabbing and population control operations, undermining the Paris Agreement. The international situation has also changed since pursuing a policy of rapprochement. With Washington, China shifted its focus to opposing the Soviet Union and began reducing aid, withdrawing experts, and encroaching on Vietnamese territory. Beijing does not want our country to have territorial integrity and become power. Vietnamese Labor Party recognized that its immediate task was to quickly unify the country in order to prepare to face new challenges. Beginning in 1974, a series of large-scale attacks aimed at probing the likelihood of American intervention and the strength of the Saigon forces. The results suggest that the likelihood of Washington returning is very low. Meanwhile, the Republic of Vietnam was in a full-blown crisis. The Army lacked fire support, and the Air Force had limited ground support. This reduces the effectiveness of airstrikes. The two most elite branches of the military, the Marines and the paratroopers, were short of personnel due to heavy losses during the war. Furthermore, fuel and spare parts for combat vehicles are becoming increasingly scarce, severely impairing their strategic mobility. In Saigon, President Nguyen Van Thieu was preoccupied with corruption, forming factions, and suppressing opposition. Given this situation, many Saigon officials and officers knew that the regime was on the verge of collapse. They don't bother working. Instead, they focus on squandering their assets and sending their wives and children abroad under the guise of studying or receiving medical treatment. The opportunity for the revolution to achieve a decisive victory has never been more favorable. The Liberation Army decided to launch a general offensive and uprising. For the first time, the majority of strategic mobile units were simultaneously mobilized to the battlefield. Surprising turning point occurred right at the beginning of the war. In the opening campaign in the Central Highlands, General Hong Minthao successfully launched a feint attack that crushed the Second Corps of the Republic of Vietnam Army. The liberation of the roof of Indochina opened up the possibility for our troops to bypass Huan Dai Nang, strike directly at the south-central coast, neutralize the puppet army in the south, and isolate their forces in the first tactical zone. At that time, General Ngo Quang Truong commanded the strongest unit of the Republic of Vietnam, the 1st Corps, along with the Marine Division. He deployed his troops in the plains, waiting there to attack our main forces coming from the Quang Tri direction. Upon hearing of the disastrous defeat on the Western Front, Ngo Quang Truong was very worried and feared his retreat would be cut off. So he rushed back to Saigon to seek the President and Phi 39's advice. Nguyen Van Thieu gave an ambiguous and vague answer. The lack of consistency in stating whether to withdraw or retreat caused confusion for the manager. When the Y Army heard the news, they panicked and their ranks crumbled before they could even fight a major battle. It was every man for himself as he fled, abandoning his equipment and weapons and even killing each other along the way. Thanks to this, Nguyen Huan was able to easily advance and liberate Huan Da Nang, controlling most of central Vietnam without encountering strong resistance. In the south, General Hong Cam, commander of the 4th Army Corps, defeated the Republic of Vietnam at Phuoc Long, and the enemy is now in a very weak position. For the first time in 30 years of fighting, Ta Man surpassed the enemy in firepower, troop numbers, and logistical capabilities. in Saigon, and Guyan Van Thieu was forced to gamble on a tumultuous front line if he could inflict significant losses on the liberation forces. Here, he would have a bargaining opportunity at the negotiating table. If they lose, they in a 39 take their assets and flee abroad. The town of Xuân Lộc is located in the Longkamut sub-district. Now Dalenjnai province lies on three major transportation routes: National Highway 1, Highway 20, and Highway 1560 km. Northeast of Saigon, this place is strategically located on the main artery connecting the central highlands Music region with Saigon and from Da Lat Lam Dong southward. If they could hold Xuân Lộc, the South Vietnamese forces could prevent our troops from attacking Saigon from the east. However, this location is not advantageous. For defense, the surrounding terrain consisted of only a few gently sloping hills about 800 meters high, making it very difficult to stop the enemy. Nearby is an old French rubber plantation which was a long-time base of operations for special forces and guerrilla units of the 4th Corps. Within the town of Xuân Lộc, the local party committee also managed to plant supporters of the revolution. Meanwhile, in the outskirts of the town, the people rose up and took control of several areas while also preparing water, food, and guides to support the main enemy forces. The Saigon forces were well aware of this. To overcome the terrain and Fe-39's weaknesses, they established minefields, barbed wire fences, and trenches around the area. Several attack aircraft were stationed at Bien Hoa Airfield 50 km away, ready to launch sorties to support the defensive forces. To break through this defensive line, the 4th Corps mobilized the majority of its forces. They brought along 30,000 soldiers, not including Music support troops from other corps and military districts in the final stages of the battle. Most of the soldiers participating in the campaign were elite troops who had been tested in the fires of many fierce battles. To gain a firepower advantage, General Hong Kam also prepared a large number of 130 howitzers and 8 2mm mortars, along with a large reserve of ammunition far exceeding that of the enemy. The unit tasked with the deep penetration attack consisted of a heavy armored regiment using T-54 main battle tanks, 6 amphibious tanks. The infantry was also mobilized by BTR-60 and M1-13 armored personnel carriers, which were captured as war trophies from the enemy. As for the Republic of Vietnam, the defensive musical force here was mainly the 18th Infantry Division with approximately 6,000 soldiers. In the past, this was the most incompetent unit of the Saigon Army. It was a collection of underperforming non-commissioned officers from other divisions who were absent from all major events of the Republic of Vietnam. However, Le Minh Dao, a young general, after taking over the unit, reformed discipline and training through mock battles, simulating the fighting style of the Liberation Army. Thus, in less than a year, the 18th Infantry Division, from its position as a weak unit, had become a highly effective force. To ambush our troops at Xuân Lộc, they also prepared a series of Hun-5 artillery pieces and hand grenades. A few weeks after being attacked by the Liberation Army, the Saigon government also deployed the 3rd Armored Brigade and a commando regiment of about 2,500 Thai music soldiers to provide support to Minh Dao. The remnants of a South Vietnamese paratrooper battalion were defeated in another area. After hearing that the island was putting up a very strong resistance, nearly 2,000 people gathered in Long Kiuet, further reinforcing the defensive perimeter around San Lo Si. In addition, Minh Dao also recruited local troops, militia, and civilian guards. This group was the least trained, but they were quite numerous, numbering up to 4,000 people. The total number of South Vietnamese troops fighting at Xuân Lộc was therefore raised to nearly 20,000. As a cautious military commander, General Hong Kam did not attack Xuân Lộc directly, but instead launched a more modest and reputable offensive. He wanted to prevent the enemy from using these two areas as a springboard to attack the supply lines of the B Corps, while also creating a diversion to divert forces away from rescuing Xuân Lộc. The attack was easily successful. Our troops captured over 1,000 guns, cannons, ammunition, and 8 armored. These supplies were repurposed as a supplement for the main battle. On May 18, 1970, we launched an attack on the enemy in 39's outer defense system around Xuân Lộc. General Hong Kam ordered 2 artillery regiments to open fire on the Dun Quan defensive line, north of the town and the Lang Nga Bridge. To the west, at other locations, our troops fired several feigned volleys forcing the enemy to disperse their forces. After several hours of artillery fire, the liberation forces used armored vehicles to advance and clear a path for the infantry to cross the bridge that was Russia. General Amin anticipated our intentions and therefore positioned a commando unit in ambush nearby. However, before they could act, they were subjected to intense artillery fire and forced to flee. One of our combat groups approached the enemy. At the Fort and 39's crossroads, the Special Forces soldiers fought their way down to the enemy, holding them back while the engineers planted mines to destroy the crane at Jar. Our troops also launched an attack. The two sides fought fiercely. The Liberation Army seized the high ground, which was both advantageous for observation and made it easy to set up artillery positions to fire on the town. At the same time, our engineering corps also completed its meticulous task, while still worried about losing the interprovincial road connecting to Xuân Lộc. Phi received news that the Liberation Army was deploying 54 tanks. On Mindao Island, the general had to take a risk and order the commando unit to counterattack on Route 20. He also dispatched several well-trained commando teams equipped with M72 and tank guns to secret ambush the rolling tank formations during the. Based on previous combat experience, the South Vietnamese army realized that the M72 was useless against the Southern Vietnamese soldier. Compared to the RPG-7 used by the Liberation Army, this anti-tank weapon has weaker destructive power, a shorter range, and is only more expensive and more difficult to use. Furthermore, its warhead design makes it prone to ricocheting when it hits the NF-39's angled armor. However, the South Vietnamese commando unit found a way to overcome this critical point. That NF-39's a flanking maneuver aimed directly at the T-55 and 39's tracks, and firing would be enough to disable the combat vehicle. They then fled and returned to attack when the Liberation Army was unprepared. In this way, these naval artillery units successfully neutralized several tank platoons. At the outposts under attack, the military commissioners also emerged from their fortifications to counterattack. Faced with the enemy and NF-39's stubborn resistance and lacking armored vehicle support, our troops were forced to temporarily withdraw. At the same time, Saigon dispatched an armored unit from Tay Ninh to Long Con. After breaking through part of the encirclement, this force advanced into Xuân Lộc to support the defending troops. Upon receiving reinforcements, Le Minh navally believed that if he performed well in the battle, the Americans would return to help the Saigon government, so he went on television to declare his determination to win. The fighting has temporarily subsided. By April 1975, our troops were consolidating their encirclement around Xuân Lộc. Brigade B decided to shift to an outer perimeter attack, first targeting Xuân Lộc and Bien Ho to block Route 2 leading to Bar. Le Minh realized that, given the situation of being isolated, standing guard was not a good idea. He ordered attacks on all three routes in order to slow down our advance. The Liberation Army then launched a continuous artillery barrage, severely depleting their forces. To avoid a prolonged conflict, General Hong Kamjila concentrated his forces into a combined arms formation to attack directly towards the north and northeast of the town. On April 9, 1975 a.m., we launched our all-out attack. The Liberation Army simultaneously fired 130 leader artillery shells, suppressing the enemy in R-39's defensive positions for an entire hour. As soon as the artillery fire ceased, the soldiers simultaneously attacked the Injigantidan intersection and a series of bunkers along the three roads connecting the town with the surrounding areas. The two sides fought for over an hour. To the north, our duo captured the communications center and the police station. A tank regiment, in conjunction with two of our infantry regiments, routed the enemy on the outermost yellow defensive line. When the Liberation Army was only 200 meters from the command post of the puppet 18th Division, the Saigon soldiers suddenly launched a counterattack. 3 of our 8 tanks were set on fire. The Liberation Army was forced to retreat. In the southeast direction, we used a flanking armored formation with 8 tanks at the forefront, followed by armored vehicles and supporting infantry moving and firing at the enemy simultaneously. The puppet army and infantry put up fierce resistance. After a few hours, Saigon troops from the outer perimeter arrived to reinforce and dislodge our forces from the fortified positions. At 8:39 o'clock, General Hong Kam ordered the reinforcement of 10 more armored tanks with accompanying infantry to support the deep penetration attack through the enemy and the 39's defensive line. The passive South Vietnamese army then resorted to their old tactics, sending a few small groups of soldiers to harass the enemy. Use M72 rocket launchers a large and small caliber to strike the 39's weak points. Upon arriving at Minh Dao and seeing our tanks on fire, they immediately sent 11 armored vehicles into the 18th Infantry Division to pursue us from both directions. When the South Vietnamese armored convoy of 11 vehicles was traveling on Highway 1, they were suddenly ambushed by you guys. Most of their vehicles were M1 Vertines with flimsy aluminum hulls, making them easily destroyed by 20 Sentinel machine guns, 4-ton guns. Realizing that a large part of his army was surrounded, Le Minh Dao feared he had fallen into a trap. Instead of rescuing the distressed group of soldiers, he ordered his infantry to launch a surprise attack on our rear lines in the north, prioritizing the destruction of ammunition depots and armored vehicles. And so both the Liberation Army and the Republic of Vietnam returned to a stalemate, with neither side gaining the upper hand. On April 10th, Emperor Hong Kam ordered the 6th Music Division to concentrate its forces and feign an attack on the positions of the militia security forces, which were their weakest link. The Wei Army, having fallen into a trap, immediately dispatched troops to reinforce their positions, causing their forces on the central line to be overwhelmed. Having waited for this moment, our troops launched a second all-out attack directly targeting the position of the 18th Infantry Division. Puppet Army suffered heavy losses and had to retreat to the rear lines around Xuân Lộc, where the encirclement was tightened. On the 11th, the Liberation Forces switched to attacking and encircling the enemy in Fe-39's paratrooper and commando units on the outer perimeter. Our method was to encircle and attack in turns, exhausting even the most resilient Saigon soldiers and demoralizing them. The remaining armored units of the enemy attempted a counterattack, but most of them were destroyed. Shortly afterward, our troops were gaining the upper hand, but the paratroopers who had infiltrated the puppet regime in Fe-39's 18th Infantry Division were still putting up fierce resistance. On the 12th of a month, several companies of remnants of the South Vietnamese Army from Cu Chi and other locations managed to sneak through the encirclement into Xuân Lộc to support the defending forces. Despite the dense anti-aircraft defenses of the South Vietnamese CH-47 aircraft, still recklessly carried out up to 200 missions to resupply Xuân Lộc with ammunition and medical supplies. In response, our troops reinforced their air defenses and intensified the siege of the last remaining outposts on the summit. Realizing that our troops were concentrated in very high numbers, Le Minh Dao requested maximum air support. The Saigon authorities immediately dispatched a C-130 aircraft carrying CBU-55. This is a thermobaric weapon that, upon detonation, will burn up the air and raise the pressure to 1 ton per square centimeter within a 200-meter diameter. It has the power to wipe out all living things. People standing near the zone of destruction could also suffer burns, or its operating mechanism is almost identical to the OD-500 bomb that Russia used in Ukraine. Accordingly, the CB-55 is a prohibited weapon. This type of bomb was not originally in service with the Republic of Vietnam. However, due to the urgent situation, an American general secretly ordered a few missiles to be moved from Thailand to Saigon as a final aid gift. Because they were so few in number, the Wei dynasty did not dare to launch an attack during the rainstorms, unlike the American strategy of carpet bombing. Only when Le Minh Dao announced that our troops had concentrated their forces in a very dense formation did they bring them out to use. The C-130 aircraft arrived intending to drop 2 CBU-55 bombs on the highest concentration of Liberation Army troops, but because they had to avoid grabbing the anti-aircraft comm, they dropped it outside the designated area. 1 shell landed behind the lines of the 34th 1st Division, and 1 ball landed near the White Court. As a result, trees and houses in the surrounding area were blown away. At least 200 people died instantly. 500 soldiers standing nearby were wounded. Some people who were able to fight felt short of breath and disoriented. Following the bombing, Le Minh Dao urged the 18th Infantry Division to launch a counterattack. Fierce fighting resumed across the front lines in the town. On the 13th of Heymonth, General Tran Van Tra personally ordered the Southern Liberation Army to cross the Dong Nai River to La Anga to meet with General Hong Kam, both to encourage the 4th Corps and to assess the situation in order to mobilize additional troops to reinforce the battle. My father, the general, felt it was unnecessary for us to engage in a life-or-death battle with the enemy and 39's elite troops. Accordingly, the Liberation Army only needed to contain the enemy head-on and launch a strong attack from the rear, cutting off the Xuân Lộc stronghold from the rear. Areas of Bien Ho, Bao Dao, and Vung Tau. From April 14th, April 15th, our troops shifted their artillery fire to Bien Ho Airport, preventing the South Vietnamese Army from providing air support. The oil field area, the weakest point of Xuân Lộc, was subjected to a concentrated artillery mortar and machine gun attack by our forces. The road connecting Vung Tau with Xuân Lộc was infiltrated by Liberation Army commandos, paving the way for infantry to seize and blockade the area. Then the 4th Corps concentrated its forces to attack the South Vietnamese armored units and 155 artillery emplacements at Xuân Lộc. From April 16th to 17th, puppet army of Tua Xuân Lộc was in a precarious situation. The mobile forces suffered heavy losses. The remnants of the paratrooper brigade were exhausted from fighting for many days and nights. Many soldiers had to flee into the jungle, switching to a style of warfare involving looting and assassination like the rebels. Although the soldiers of the 18th Division still had the strength to fight, they had run out of weapons. Most of the war vehicles were severely damaged. Adding to the already dire situation, Le Minh Dao received further bad news. The Phan Giang outpost guarding the south-central coast had collapsed to the attack of the Golden Division. That also meant that nothing could stop Nguyen Huan from leading the 2nd Army Corps south. If this force had reinforced General Hong Kam, Xuân Lộc would have also fallen, because it is impossible for a single 18th Division with a few supporting units to stop 2 Army Corps. If General Nguyen Huan were to launch a direct attack on Saigon, the defense of Xuân Lộc would become meaningless. In utter panic, Le Minh Dao frantically ordered the 18th Infantry Division to launch a simultaneous attack on our positions in the western oil field area, Xuân Lộc town, and along National Highway 1. Waiting for this moment, we shifted from a siege to an offensive, launching continuous attacks from all directions, inflicting heavy losses on the enemy, to the point where they were almost completely. From April 18th to 19th, 18th Division of the Puppet Army was forced to return to its old defensive position and continue holding out on the left flank. At the same time, some former South Vietnamese Marine units that had fled from central Vietnam regrouped into 2 brigades, establishing a temporary defensive line. At the border, 18th Infantry Division of the Puppet Army immediately fled in this direction. At Xuân Lộc, only the South Vietnamese soldiers stubbornly remained. Not long after, the group disbanded, with some fleeing into the forest to become bandits or crossing the border to other countries. On October 20th, Le Minh Dao fled to. On April 21st, Xuân Lộc was completely liberated. The eastern gate of Saigon swung open. The match has officially ended. As for Le Minh Dao, after returning to Saigon, I heard that Nguyen Van Thieu had fled to Taiwan. He cursed and then went home to hug his child and wept in despair. Not long after, he surrendered to the revolutionary forces and had undergo education until 1993. Xuân Lộc is considered the only instance of this happening. During the final stages of the war, the Marines could mount a resistance with division-level forces fighting with nothing left to lose. In the early stages, the enemy was overwhelmed by their superior forces, but the Hue Army did not flee, as they had done before. Instead, they retreated using extremely reckless methods. Xuân Lộc was also the only place where the Puppet Army used the tactic of bombing through the air without success. In 39's about holding on. Wait until the enemy has concentrated into a large formation around the defensive point before detonating the bomb to maximize damage effectiveness. Do not assume that this was the first and last time the Republic of Vietnam optimized the power of heavy weaponry in a situation where the weak defeated the strong. In previous battles, they were only used to carelessly and wastefully beating the enemy, causing the soldiers unfamiliar with combat to flee as soon as they entered the battle. On our side, realizing they couldn't finish the job, the Liberation Army flexibly shifted their attack to surrounding areas while simultaneously encircling them. She isolated the enemy. After all, Xuân Lộc not only left us with invaluable lessons about organizing, combat operations, attacking, encircling, and maximizing the advantages of all means of warfare, the reality there also confirmed that one swallow does not make a spring, and a strong division cannot save an entire cowardly and weak army. Victory belongs only to those who demonstrate righteousness and persevere in their struggle to the very end.